Crusoe close along his side. He thought it was the best and sweetest supper he ever ate, and the happiest evening he ever spent, so wonderfully do circumstances modify our notions of felicity. 2 weeks after this, Richard was himself again. The muscles were springy, and the blood coursed fast and free, as was its wont. Only a slight, and perhaps salutary feeling of weakness remained, to remind him that young muscles might again become more helpless than those of an aged man or child. Dick had left his encampment a week ago, and was now advancing by rapid stages toward the Rocky Mountains, closely following the trail of his lost comrades, which he had no difficulty in finding and keeping, now that Crusoe was with him. The skin of the buffalo that he had killed was now strapped to his shoulders, and the skin of another animal that he had shot a few days after was cut up into a long line and slung in a coil around his neck. Crusoe was also laden. He had a little bundle of meat slung on each side of him. For some time past, numerous herds of mustangs or wild horses had crossed their path, and Dick was now on the lookout for a chance to crease one of these magnificent creatures. On one occasion a band of mustangs galloped close up to him before they were aware of his presence, and stopped short with a wild snort of surprise on beholding him. Then, wheeling around, they dashed away at full gallop, their long tails and manes flying wildly in the air, and their hoofs thundering on the plain. Dick did not attempt to crease one upon this occasion, fearing that his recent illness might have rendered his hand too unsteady for so extremely delicate an operation. In order to crease a wild horse, the hunter requires to be a perfect shot, and it is not every man of the West who carries a rifle that can do it successfully. Creasing consists of sending a bullet through the gristle of the mustang's neck, just above the bone, so as to stun the animal. If the ball enters a hair's breadth too low, the horse falls dead instantly. If it hits the exact spot, the horse falls as instantaneously and dead to all appearance. But in reality he is only stunned, and if left for a few minutes will rise and gallop away nearly as well as ever. When hunters crease a horse successfully, they put a rope or halter round his under jaw and hobbles around his feet, so that when he rises he is secured, and after considerable trouble reduced to obedience. The mustangs which roam in wild freedom on the prairies of the far West are descended from the noble Spanish steeds that were brought over by the wealthy cavaliers who accompanied Fernando Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico, in his expedition to the world in 1518. These bold and, we may add, lawless cavaliers were mounted on the finest horses that could be procured from the Barbary and the deserts of the Old World. The poor Indians of the New World were struck with amazement and terror at these awful beings, for, never having seen horses before, they believed that horse and rider were one animal. During the wars that followed, many of the Spaniards were killed and their steeds bounded into the wilds of the new country to enjoy a life of unrestrained freedom. These were the forefathers of the present race of magnificent creatures which are found in immense droves all over the western wilderness, from the Gulf of Mexico to the confines of the snowy regions of the far north. At first the Indians beheld these horses with awe and terror, but gradually they became accustomed to them, and finally succeeded in capturing great numbers and reducing them to a state of servitude. Not, however, to the service of the cultivated field, but to the service of the chase and war. The savages soon acquired the method of capturing wild horses by means of the lasso, as the noose at that end of a long line of rawhide is termed, which they adroitly threw over the heads of the animals and secured them, having previously run them down. At the present day many of the savage tribes of the West almost live upon horseback, and without these useful creatures they could scarcely subsist, as they are almost indispensable in the chase of the buffalo. Mustangs are regularly taken by the Indians to the settlement of the white men for trade, but very poor specimens are these of the breed of wild horses. This arises from 2 causes. First, the Indian cannot overtake the finest of a drove of wild mustangs, because his own steed is inferior to the best among the wild ones, besides being weighted with a rider, so that only the weak and inferior animals are captured. And secondly, when the Indian does succeed in lassoing a first-rate horse, he keeps it for his own use. Thus Those who have not visited the far-off prairies and seen the mustang in all the glory of untrammeled freedom can form no adequate idea of its beauty, fleetness, and strength. The horse, however, was not the only creature imported by Cortez. There were priests in his army who rode upon asses, and although we cannot imagine that the fathers charged with the cavaliers and were unhorsed, or rather unassed, in a battle, yet somehow the asses got rid of their riders and joined the Spanish chargers in their joyous bound into a new life of freedom. Hence wild asses are also found in the western prairies. But think not, reader, of those poor miserable wretches we see at home, which seem little better than rough doormats sewed up and stuffed, with head, tail, and legs attached, and just enough of life infused to make them move. No, the wild ass of the prairie is a large, powerful, swift creature. He has the same long ears, it is true, and the same hideous, exasperating bray, and the same tendency to flourish his heels. But for all that, he is a very fine animal, and often wages successful warfare with the wild horse. But to return. The next drove of mustangs that Dick and Crusoe saw were feeding quietly and unsuspectingly in a rich green hollow in the plain. Dick's heart leaped up as his eyes suddenly fell on them, for he had almost discovered himself before he was aware of their presence. "Down, pup!" he whispered as he sank and disappeared among the grass, which was just long enough to cover him when lying quite flat. Crusoe crouched immediately, and his master made his observations of the drove, and the dispositions of the ground that might favor his approach, for they were not within rifle range. Having done so, he crept slowly back until the undulation of the prairie hid him from view. Then he sprang to his feet and ran a considerable distance along the bottom until he gained the extreme end of a belt of low bushes, which would effectually conceal him while he approached to within 100 yards or less of the troop. Here he made his arrangements. Throwing down his buffalo robe, he took the coil of line and cut off a piece about 3 yards in length. On this he made a running noose. The longer line he also prepared with a running noose. These he threw in a coil over his arm. He also made a pair of hobbles and placed them in the breast of his coat, and then, taking up his rifle, advanced cautiously through the bushes, Crusoe following close behind him. In a few minutes he was gazing in admiration at the mustangs, which were now within easy shot, and utterly ignorant of the presence of man, for Dick had taken care to approach in such a way that the wind did not carry the scent of him in their direction. And well might he admire them. The wild horse of these regions is not very large, but it is exceedingly powerful, with prominent eye, sharp nose, distended nostril, small feet, and a delicate leg. Their beautiful manes hung at great lengths down their arched necks, and their thick tails swept the ground. One magnificent fellow in particular attracted Dick's attention. It was of a rich dark brown color, with black mane and tail, and seemed to be the leader of the drove. Although not the nearest to him, he resolved to crease this horse. It is said that creasing generally destroys or damages the spirit of the horse, so Dick determined to try whether his powers of close shooting would not serve him on the occasion. Going down on one knee, he aimed at the creature's neck, just a hair breadth above the spot where he had been told that hunters usually hit them, and fired. The effect upon the group was absolutely tremendous. With wild cries and snorting terror they tossed their proud heads in the air, uncertain for one moment in which direction to fly. Then there was a rush as if a hurricane swept over the place, and they were gone. But the brown horse was down. Dick did not wait until the others had fled. He dropped his rifle, and with the speed of a deer sprang towards the fallen horse, and affixed the hobbles to its leg. His aim had been true. Although scarcely half a minute elapsed between the shot and the fixing of the hobbles, the animal recovered, and with a frantic exertion rose on his haunches, just as Dick had fastened the noose of the short line in his under jaw. But this was not enough. If the horse had gained his feet before the longer line was placed round his neck, he would have escaped. As the mustang made the second violent plunge that placed it on its legs, Dick flung the noose hastily. It caught on one ear, and would have fallen off had the horse not suddenly shaken its head and